Ellie had always been fascinated by the paranormal. As an amateur ghost hunter, she spent weekends exploring supposedly haunted locations around the city, recording her adventures for her small but dedicated online following. So when she heard rumors about the old Blackwood Hospital on the edge of town, she knew she had to investigate. The hospital had been abandoned for decades, closed suddenly after a mysterious fire in the 1980s. Some locals whispered that it was cursed, others claimed it was haunted by the souls of those who perished in the blaze. Ellie shrugged off the stories. She'd been to enough haunted places to know that rumors were often just that, rumors. But as she parked her car in front of the towering, dilapidated building, a shiver crept up her spine. The hospital was imposing, its stone facade cracked and weathered by years of neglect. Broken windows gaped like hollow eyes, and ivy crawled up the walls, attempting to reclaim the structure. Ellie tightened her grip on her flashlight and stepped inside, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The air was thick and cold, carrying a faint scent of mold and decay. The first floor was littered with debris, scattered papers, broken furniture, and rusted medical equipment. Ellie turned on her camera and began recording, her voice steady as she narrated her exploration. "All right, guys," she whispered into the camera. "We're inside Blackwood Hospital, rumored to be one of the most haunted places in the city. Let's see if there's any truth to the stories." She moved cautiously through the building, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of her vision, but she brushed it off as her mind playing tricks on her. She wandered through the empty rooms, finding nothing out of the ordinary, until she reached the hospital's main staircase. At the top of the stairs, a faded sign read, "Psychiatric ward, no unauthorized access." Ellie felt a thrill of excitement. Ghost hunters had claimed that the psychiatric ward was the most active part of the hospital, where patients' screams supposedly echoed through the halls late at night. She ascended the staircase, her footsteps slow and careful. The air grew colder with each step, and a heavy silence settled over her. She felt as if she were being watched, but every time she turned around, the hall behind her was empty. The psychiatric ward was in worse shape than the rest of the hospital. Rust-colored stains marked the walls, and the doors to patient rooms hung open, creaking softly as a draft moved through the hallway. She checked a few rooms, finding only broken beds and peeling wallpaper. But when she reached the end of the hall, she found a door that was different. The door was marked with the number 13, and unlike the others, it was closed. An uneasy feeling settled in her stomach. She reached out to touch the doorknob, finding it cold to the touch. The door creaked open with a slow, mournful sound, and Ellie stepped inside. The room was small and empty, with nothing but a single metal bed frame in the center. Rusted chains dangled from the bedposts, and the walls were covered in strange symbols, scratched into the plaster by what looked like fingernails. Ellie shivered, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. She raised her camera to record the symbols when she heard a faint whisper. "Help me." Ellie froze, her heart pounding. The voice was faint, barely more than a breath, but it was unmistakable. She swallowed hard, her mouth dry. Is someone there?" she asked, her voice trembling. The room was silent, but the temperature seemed to drop further. Her breath puffed out in small clouds, and she felt a chill seep into her bones. She shone her flashlight around the room, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. She took a step back, intending to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Ellie screamed, rushing to the door and yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at her throat as she pounded on the door. "Let me out!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the small room. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, and she felt a presence behind her, a heavy, suffocating energy that made it hard to breathe. She turned slowly, her heart hammering as she shone her flashlight toward the bed. Standing beside the bed was a figure, a woman dressed in a faded hospital gown, her hair tangled and her skin pale as snow. Her eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to swallow the light. She stared at Ellie, her lips moving soundlessly, before the whisper returned, echoing around the room. "Help me." Ellie backed away, pressing herself against the door as the figure took a step forward. Her flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows around the room. She tried to speak, but fear had stolen her voice. The woman reached out, her hand stretching toward Ellie, her fingers elongated and skeletal. Desperation overtook her, and she fumbled with her camera, holding it up as if it could somehow protect her. What do you want?" she managed to choke out, her voice barely audible. The woman's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, her eyes dark and empty. She lifted her hand, pointing to the wall behind Ellie. Slowly, Ellie turned, her flashlight illuminating the symbols scratched into the plaster. As she looked closer, she realized they weren't just random markings. They were names, hundreds of names, scratched over and over, covering every inch of the wall. Her own name was among them. Terror flooded her, and she turned back to the ghostly woman. "No, no, this can't be," she whispered, her voice breaking. The woman took another step forward, her hollow eyes fixed on Ellie. The whisper returned, louder this time, echoing through the room. "Stay with me," Ellie screamed, the sound tearing through her throat. She yanked on the door with all her strength, finally feeling it give way. She stumbled backward into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind her. The whispering stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Gasping for breath, Ellie backed away from the door, her heart racing. She could still feel the woman's eyes on her, watching her from beyond the door. Without a second thought, she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the empty hospital. As she reached the staircase, she glanced back, half expecting to see the woman standing at the end of the hall. But the corridor was empty. Ellie didn't stop until she was outside, gasping for air as she leaned against her car. She looked back at the hospital, the broken windows staring down at her like empty eyes. The silence was deafening, and she could almost hear the faint whisper echoing in her ears. "Stay with me." Without another glance, Ellie got into her car and sped away, leaving Blackwood Hospital and its dark secrets behind. But as she drove, she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't escaped alone. She could still feel a cold presence lingering, watching her from the shadows, as if the ghostly woman had followed her into the night.